All right. Hi everyone. Welcome to the first session of this AAEA. So my name is Shanti. I'm a postdoc at Cornell. I'll also be the moderator for the session. So if you're on the AAEA app, you will notice that for this session, only have 2 presenters. One of them won't be able to join us today. So it's 2 of us for 90 minutes talk. So what we'll do is we still will have 15, 20 minutes of talk, but then I probably won't time it. So if we each go over a little bit, that's fine. Then after that, with 5 to 10 minutes of the Q&A, and then at the end, have plenty of time for you to ask more questions to each of us and stay longer to chat. And and then for people in the chat, you can send your questions, but then we'll address that at the end of each speaker, right? So, okay, so that forces.
All right, thanks, Chanti. I'm Andrew Rosenberg. And today I will be talking about voluntary conservation programs and cover crop adoption. This was joint work from Brian Pratt, myself, Dan Schmerlo, and Ryan Williams. We're all at the USDA Economic Research Service. So cover crops have become a very popular intervention for soil health in recent years. Basically, a cover crop is a crop that's planted between harvests and can protect the soil and has potential on and off farm benefits such as soil protection for erosion, can reduce off farm impacts on water pollution, and it might have the ability to sequester carbon. Due to these potential benefits, the Natural Resources Conservation Service has become a major funder of cover crops in recent years, particularly through 2 what are called working lands programs, the Environmental Quality Incentives Program and the Conservation Stewardship Program, or CSP. We're going to focus on the EQIP, or the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, for this project. And I've put a couple of numbers here about how much the funding for cover crops has increased in the last 20 years or so. So you can see it's really been a big increase. $7 million in 2005, $155 million in 2018. It's actually pretty similar now. And the goal is to keep expanding the amount of acreage in cover crops through increased amounts of financial assistance for cover crops. So in this particular project, we're going to focus on something called landscape initiatives. And these landscape initiatives provide for certain watersheds additional funding compared to just your average watershed. Particularly, we're going to focus on the additional funding for cover crops. And in some areas, there's also the ability to get a higher payment rate, which is the amount that's being paid per acre to participate in these programs, particularly for a cover crop. So I'll provide some more details on that in a little bit. So just a preview of our results and our research questions. So there's a couple of different groups of questions that we're looking at. So I mentioned the 2 interventions that these initiatives have. So the first one is increased funding for cover crops. And so for this increased funding, we look at 2 outcomes. One is, does the increased funding for cover crops actually increase enrollments in EQIP? And then does it impact cover cropping across the whole landscape? What we find is that there is a positive and significant impact of this increased funding on both of these outcomes. And then the second group of questions is the same 2 outcomes, but we look at differentiated payment rates. So basically, when a state also has different payment rates for those watersheds that are offering additional funding versus the watersheds outside of the initiative funding eligible areas, is there an additional impact on both of these outcomes? And it's actually inconclusive. We need a little bit more work to try to study this, the impacts of this particular intervention. Okay, so this is going to contribute to a couple of different strains of literature. First is the additionality of financial assistance. In particular, there's been quite a few studies that have looked at additionality, or the degree to which funding for cover crops would not have been, the land that's being funded would not have been cover cropped otherwise. There's been quite a few studies looking at this using different approaches. So that's one of the literatures we're going to be contributing to. Also, there's a literature that looks at factors that influence program enrollments and kind of more program design kind of elements. In particular, this kind of trade-off between extra funding and the role of the payment rate or the amount that's being paid per acre. That's something that hasn't been explored a ton, but there's a little bit of literature looking at that. So this slide just shows a bit of background on the policy that we're going to look at. So again, it's the Environmental Quality Incentives Program. This is administered by NRCS within USDA. They provide financial and technical assistance for a variety of conservation practices. So cover crops is just one of them. That's the one we're going to focus on, but there's many practices that are funded through EQIP. Typically, a contract through EQIP is 1 to 3 years. 3 is actually the most common, but 1 and 2 are also fairly common. And within EQIP, as I alluded to, there's what's called landscape initiatives. And basically what these landscape initiatives boil down to is higher funding for selected watersheds for what are designated as priority practices and resource concerns. So a practice would be cover crops. A resource concern might be soil erosion. So higher funding is available for these watersheds, and for states that decide to do so, the watersheds that are in these initiatives can receive a higher payment per acre compared to watersheds that are not in the initiative. In particular, we focus on the National Water Quality Initiative, or NWQI. This is a joint project between a few different agencies, so NRCS, but also the EPA and state water agencies. And like some of the other initiatives, it provides these two benefits, the higher funding and potentially higher rates. Something unique about the NWQI is that there's only, it's watersheds that are surrounded by untreated watersheds, whereas some initiatives are kind of big swaths of land that are in the program. So I'm going to show a map, I believe in the next slide or in 2 slides, that will show which watersheds are actually in the program. And once a state decides which watersheds to be in the program, they can be in the program or be eligible to receive this extra funding for a few years. They might go out of the program in the study period that we look at, or they might continue for the rest of the study period. And then here's a list of some other landscape initiatives that we don't look at, but watersheds that are in these or that are eligible for funding through these initiatives are removed from our analysis. So we have 610 watersheds at the HUC 12 level. This spans across 10 different states in the Midwest and Plains, and from 2012 to 2018. So we have 81 watersheds that at some point in this period are eligible for extra funding through NWQI, or that actually do receive extra funding through NWQI. And they vary in terms of when they enter the program and when they exit the program. And 5 of the 10 states that are involved in this analysis during the study period have some period where there's differentiated rates for those watersheds in the initiative and those that are out of the initiative. And then for each of these treated watersheds, they're matched to several control watersheds based on a variety of factors that I've listed here. And so in the next slide, I'll show what this sample looks like. So you can see the 10 states that are involved in this analysis here. In the orange are the treated watersheds, so that's 81. And then the control watersheds are the deep blue in the map here. And then in these squares with the states and the years, those are the years and states that offer differentiated rates and the years in which they do that. So I'm going to get right into the analysis. The first outcome, again, that we look at is enrollment in EQIP for cover crops. We do this from 2012 to 2018 using the NRCS ProTrax database. Basically, this is all of the acreage that enrolls in EQIP for cover crops in a given year. So every farmer that signs a contract, all the acres are aggregated up in that particular watershed in that particular year. And then I'm going to get right into a regression. The outcome here is what I just showed in the last slide, the total acreage in cover crops in a particular watershed in a particular year. And then on the right-hand side of this regression, there's HUC 12 level fixed effects, as well as match group year fixed effects. So every treated watershed is matched with several control watersheds, and that's one match group. And then there's match group year fixed effects there. And then shown in the table are 6 different treatment regressors. So the first 3 are kind of the baseline effect of NWQI. That's just the effect of increases in funding from eligibility of the watershed for NWQI. And so basically, the only thing that changes is that they get more funding for cover crop contracts. What you can see is relative to this baseline that's on the second to last row there, 43.71, there's a big impact of NWQI. So in a non-NWQI eligible year, the baseline amount of enrollments is 43 acres. And then once NWQI is introduced, the enrollments in EQIP for cover crops really bumps up by over 200 acres. From the year of implementation through 3 years after that, this effect is statistically significant. We do see a big coefficient for 4 more years after that, but it's not statistically significant. And then we also looked at some other outcomes. It's in the manuscript, but not in the slide, but I put some of the numbers there. We looked at actual amount in these watersheds, and that also increases in similar amounts. So $10,000 to $16,000 extra in these years versus a baseline of about $2,000 per year. So then in the 4th through 6th rows, we look at the additional impact of being in a state that is offering higher rates for the NWQI watersheds compared to non-NWQI watersheds. And actually, we see a negative and significant impact for the year of implementation, and then a negative but insignificant effect after that. We're still kind of exploring why we're seeing this negative. We have a couple of different ideas about why this might be the case. One being heterogeneity between the states that do this and that don't. Also, it has to do with the timing at which differentiated rates come in. It might be the case that it's coming in after the initial introduction of the program. But this does need some more exploration. So we're not necessarily convinced that differentiated rates cause a negative additional impact. But it's an interesting result that we're going to explore some more. Okay, so we looked at enrollments in EQIP. The second thing we look at is overall cover crop adoption. And so this involves cover cropping both through EQIP and cover cropping that is not being funded. So to identify the fields that are being funded through EQIP, that are implementing a cover crop that was funded by EQIP, we again use the NRCS ProTrax database. And then for non-funded cover crops, we use the FSA crop reporting database. For this presentation, I'm just going to focus on a definition of cover crops that's very strictly cover crops. It's the definition of cover crops within this database, and we are confident that that's what they are. We also have in the paper some discussion of a more broad definition of cover crops that might encompass fields that are doing something that's functionally a cover crop but wouldn't qualify as the cover crop that NRCS's standards are requiring to call it a cover crop. And here's a regression and a few regressions and the results of those, very analogous to the last regression that I showed for EQIP enrollments. This is field level, and in the first column, it shows enrollments in EQIP, and in the second column, it's basically a measure of all cover cropping. So EQIP enrollments plus non-funded cover crops identified from the FSA data. So if you just look at that first column, the first year of implementation, there's actually not really a significant effect. We believe the reason for this is that it takes a little while to actually get the cover crops in the ground. And so they're signing up, as we saw before, but then it just takes a while for them to be implemented. But then in the first 3 years after implementation, we do see a huge increase in implementation of EQIP, or in cover cropping through EQIP. And then 4 more years, it's an even bigger effect. And that's probably because it's accumulating over multiple years of enrollments. So if you go from that second column to the first column to the second column and compare the coefficients, particularly in that box there, you can get some sense of how additional the enrollments that are happening from additional funding. Sorry, I'm using additional in 2 different ways. From extra funding from NWQI, how additional are the enrollments through EQIP? If the coefficient in the second column is near or even greater than the first, then that suggests that the effect of the program on enrollments is fairly additional, because we would expect that if it was non-additional, that coefficient would be less than the coefficient in the first column, because it would be displacing fields that would have been cover cropping that was not funded. That the funded cover crops would be displacing non-funded cover crops if it was non-additional. And so this suggests that the extra funding is fairly additional. If we look at the differentiated rates, it does mirror what we found in the enrollments regression. Basically, it's inconclusive. It might be a negative effect, but here actually we don't even see a significant impact of the differentiated rates. It is worth noting that when we say differentiated rates, it's not to mean that there's an increase in the payment rate within these watersheds. It's more likely that the NWQI watersheds are receiving similar payment rates to the non-differentiated watersheds, but that the control watersheds are just receiving lower rates. And this has to do with the way that NWQI sets its payment rates and caps them. And I can go into some more detail about that if anybody has a question. That's basically all I have for this presentation. Just to recap, we do find that the additional funding from NWQI appears to have a significant positive impact on both enrollments in cover crops and overall cover cropping. The ratios between the 2 effects suggest that the impacts of the additional funding are additional. And another interesting thing when we look at the enrollment regressions is that we see an increase in enrollments, not just in the initial implementation, but several years after initial implementation. So there does seem to be quite a bit of extra demand that the additional funding is satisfying. When we look at the differential rates, we don't see as clear of an impact. And as I've suggested, this is something that we need to look into a little bit more. If anything, there might be a negative additional impact of that differentiated rate. That's all I have, and I can take some questions now. I'm going to check the chat also. Yes.
I was curious, has there been any effort to compare the value of additionality of acres with the additional program costs? Like, because I imagine that there's extra costs like in the payment, like the private things to the producers, and then also just the implementation.
Yeah, so these numbers on the left-hand side here are just financial assistance payments. It's not including, say, technical assistance or administrative costs. But right now, we don't have the ability to look at that, but that would definitely be interesting. I guess, what did you have in mind behind looking at that?
Yeah, that comparison, because
Yeah.
so you get some additionality, right? Benefit from the increase of the crop acres, but then it's a cost to the programs. Kind of like that.
Right. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think that would be really interesting to do. At the very least, I think we could do that with just the payments. Yeah. Yes.
I think it's really interesting work, just to build on Dan's question. What can you think more about, like, what is the mechanism through which the additional funding is increasing enrollments? Is there, if it's not higher rates, like, is there kind of a constraint in the other watersheds that limits enrollment because the funding runs out, or is it better extension efforts, or what is it that's kind of driving that additional participation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I can't give a definitive answer about that, but it's definitely something that we wanted to answer definitively. The theories that you propose have been the ones that we've been thinking about. So yeah, additional extension efforts that could, if we had information about non-payments, that would probably give some insight into that. So we would like to look at that. Another thing that we could potentially look at is oversubscription. So if we don't currently have the ability to look at this, but maybe we can in the future. If there are a bunch of applications that are not being accepted, and then they receive a watershed receives additional funding, and then there's just a lot more funding to allow these kind of oversubscribed areas to enroll more acreage, then that would be one potential explanation. It could also be transactions costs. So like if the probability of being accepted influences whether people even apply, then it's kind of related to the second reason. But yeah, anyway, we're definitely interested in getting some more insight into why we're seeing this impact. But it is kind of a surprising thing. Like you would think the payment rates would be probably more influential, at least if funding was not constrained. So yes.
This is a little bit of digging into the why part, and channeling what Chappelle and Netta was saying yesterday. But have you talked with people in NRCS? Have you had a chance to interact with field agents about how these programs get implemented in different states and in different ones of the NWQI districts?
We've talked a bit with the state conservationists that are implementing these programs, and just how they think about these different factors, like how to choose watersheds and whether to offer differentiated rates. I guess I think that they are thinking about demand a lot, like which watersheds are in need of additional funding, or if it's higher payment rates, do they need additional incentive? Although, as I was saying before, it doesn't always translate into higher actual payment rates for these watersheds. So we've talked to them. I think we need to talk to them more about, like, after this was before we kind of got into the analysis. I think now that we've had these findings, kind of getting more into like what they think about these results. But yeah, that's definitely a good suggestion. I think we need to do some more on that. Anybody from the chat? If you can also, if you're on Zoom, I might not be able to hear you well, but Oh, and also Brian, I think, answered some questions. Let's see. Yeah, so I think this is addressing the last question. The state conservationists chose watersheds in part based on expected unmet demand, though that's not quantified. So it's just kind of a sense that these watersheds are in need of extra funding. And then there's a question from Andrew Swanson. Do you look at previous years' weather effects such as drought or flooding? We could. We haven't looked at that yet, but that's a good suggestion. Yeah, we have some biophysical factors in the matching exercise, and then I guess the year region effects encompass some of this, but probably would be worth explicitly bringing in some of these covariates. Yes. Yes, so Brian is on here. If he heard that question, how did we match the control and treated watersheds? He might have some input on that. I'll bring up the slide right now. So the matches were done based on, it was covariate matching, not like propensity score matching. And each of the, I believe it was 6 control watersheds for each treated watershed. Each of the controls were matched based on, it had to be within the same state as the treated watershed, and then many other factors. So we had information on EQIP enrollments for cover crops before the study period that we looked at. So for the 3 years before the study period, we measured how much enrollment for cover crops to kind of align, like how many, to get a sense of how many farmers had already enrolled in EQIP, so that we're not kind of comparing apples to oranges in terms of like who was still eligible for receiving funding. And then there was a bunch of biophysical factors that we've listed. So we had information on the crops that were growing, erodibility, NCCPI, which is an overall metric of productivity for crop growing, rainfall, and temperature. So that was, the rainfall and temperature were climate variables, not annual, as was suggested in the chat. Yes.
Do we know if the operators are adopting the cover cropping every single year, or does NRCS define qualification just sort of for 1 year? So I think control for it.
So we are observing, I guess there's 2 ways that people can cover crop, through EQIP or not through EQIP. We're observing this on an annual basis. So for EQIP, we, through the NRCS data, we see when they signed up for the contract, the years in which they proposed to implement it, and the years in which they actually were certified as having done the cover crop. And then for non-EQIP cover crops, it's self-reported data. So if they said, usually they have at least 1 planting for a field, but that's the harvested planting, and then they might have a cover crop as an additional planting for that particular field. So we should be able to observe if they adopted a cover crop multiple years, we should observe that across the years. Yeah, is that kind of good? I don't know how we're doing with time. You want to keep, if anybody else has a question, I can also talk to you afterwards. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not sure if I understand the treatment curve, but does it turn off with some watersheds so you can observe a close treatment period? That might be interesting. I know there's some kind of discussion that the cover cropping is actually privately beneficial. More people should be doing it.
Mhm.
You just nudge them to start doing it, then you realize that. And
Yeah.
so maybe you could look at that, by looking at the watersheds that had the treatment, saw increased participation, did that participation last when the treatment was taken away?
Yes, I think that's a great point. So we, this is a really cool graph that Dan Schmerler made, showing the, during the study period, the time spans that watersheds were in NWQI. So you can see they entered the program every year almost. They exited the program at different times. And then the orange is non-differentiated and the blue is differentiated. So there's a lot of variation in terms of how these different treatments come in and out. To answer your second question, yeah, the way we've set up the treatment is we've kind of treated it like once NWQI is introduced, it's treated regardless of, it's the initial implementation year, then 1 to 3 years after, and then 4 or more years after. So regardless of whether that watershed is still eligible for funding, they're still considered treated. And so the idea behind this was, at least after the first few years, we were trying to account for the fact that the eligible population is changing. And so we want to be able to kind of capture, like 4 years after, the amount of eligible fields is much smaller if a lot of them have enrolled already. And so we wanted to be able to kind of capture that dissipating effect. But I think what you were saying about it kind of doesn't allow us to look at that persistence effect. We did see some evidence of persistence in these coefficients being fairly large. Being greater than 1, it might be suggestive of persistence, because someone might have been funded for cover crops through EQIP in the first year of that first 3 years time period, and then in the second and third years they might have been not funded but still implemented or still did a cover crop, and that might be one reason that we see this. But more explicitly looking at persistence, yeah, I think that's something we need to do a little more. Yeah. All right, so I'm happy to answer more questions, either email or Brian or Dan I'm sure will also be willing to talk to you about anything. But thanks everybody, and thanks for all the questions. Very much appreciated. Looking forward to the rest of the conference. Thanks.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Shinti. I'm a postdoc at Cornell, and so gonna shift the focus a little right now to look at conservation policy and biodiversity, specifically looking at birds. So this is a joint work with Kathy Klein and Ivan Rudig, and also with ecologists at Cornell, Amanda Robold and Alexa Johnston. So this is a pretty we're still in a really preliminary stage. So any of the results they're gonna be changed later on once we fix a little bit of our research design and the sample we're using. But any comments, feedback be very much welcome. Okay, so I'm starting with a little motivation. So you know that like over the past 5 to 6 years, we've seen like a huge improvement in ag productivity over the past 56 years, thanks to the advancement of technology and also like more efficient on-farm practices. So you can see that today we are able to produce more and using like similar or even fewer inputs. But like the intensification of ag production also leads to like various aspects of the impacts on the environment. This includes like water or air quality impacts that leads to adverse human health effects and also a loss of species and habitats when you like converting land like grasslands, wetlands into crop production. And specifically here, you can see that like the birds want to convert to crop production, then they're losing their habitats, natural habitats. So like the recent literature has shown that like large scale and specialized production is kind of the main reason leading to lower biodiversity. And so the figures I'm showing here is a recent, like 2 years ago, a study in Nature or Science showing that over the past 40 years, we're losing like more than 3 billion birds in general. And then if you look at the middle one, like grassland birds, the one that hit the most, like while others kind of declining over time and then little level off, then you can see that the impact on grassland birds kind of drastically declining. So one of the reasons like why this is the case is the like increased use of insecticides and also pesticides use leading to a declining bird biodiversity. So there are a lot of different like conservation policies trying to address the impact of like the intensification of ag production on biodiversity and the environment. So one of those is the conservation resource program. So CRP is like the largest federal voluntary private lands conservation program. So today we are like maintaining around 20 million acres of CRP lands, spending like annually about like $1.6 billion on it. So the way it works is you pay, so it's essentially a land retirement program where you pay landowners to take their land out of production, and in exchange, they will put on like conservation practices for the next 10, 15 years. Usually it's like grass or tree practices for the purpose of improving like air, water quality, improving soil health, and of course, the restoration of wildlife habitat. So some non-econ like ecology literature has shown that CRP should be shown to support more species and a number of grassland birds, but at a local and regional scales. And so what they find is usually it leads to around 1.4 to 10 times more of the number of birds under CRP versus lands without CRP. But today we don't really have much evidence of the return of the CRP investment across like a broader scales. Okay, so just a little more on motivation. So like earlier this year, last year, the discussion of the new USDA budget for the CRP, we're trying to spend more money, like trying to boost the enrollment to like 27 million. So last year we were enrolling around a little more than 20. So they're trying to boost it to 27 million by spending more money. But then given what's going on right now in Ukraine, the whole like commodity prices going on right now, they actually now allow producers to terminate their contract if they're entering their last year without being penalized. So this actually has important implication for like maintaining net habitat for like bird species, because like you can take the land out of converting it back to crop production, but the other way around, when you're trying to convert cropland and then retire cropland and then start building like habitats by planting trees and grass, it actually takes several years for it to become like natural habitats. So like once they're out of the program, even if they want to enroll, it might take another few couple of years in order to get those birds back, or even not if the birds are just long gone. Okay, so what we're trying to do is this paper is to simply look at what's the effects of CRP enrollment on bird biodiversity. So there are two important biodiversity index we're going to be looking at here. The first one is the grassland birds abundance, that is the number of birds we're having. And the second one is the grassland bird species richness. So that's like the number of species. So because if you're just looking at like the number of birds, it might just be that one of them are increasing because of CRP, but then the others are decreasing. So by looking at also species richness, we have a sense of whether we are having more diverse bird species because of the benefits CRP providing. So our approach will be, so our data will be using the county level CRP enrollment over time, and then match that to the bird biodiversity index we constructed also at the county year level. So that will be our main variation from our data. And our empirical design will be IV instrument variable strategy where our instrument will be the past CRP enrollment interactive with kind of the change of the enrollment cap during the period from we're using. So the past CRP enrollment will be the enrollment from 10 years ago. So that's kind of the length of the contract, and then interactive with the change of the enrollment cap over the past 10 years. So it will be like the Bartic instrument in the sense, the spirit. So the quick preview of the finding is we find that CRP does increase grassland birds biodiversity. So for our treatment here, the CRP enrollment will be measuring as a share of a county area enrolled in CRP. So what we have here is for every 5 percentage point increase in the share of a county in CRP, we're observing every 2 more birds observed per birding trip for like an average observer. And we are observing like 0.5 more bird species observed per birding trip. Okay, so I'm jumping right into the data we're using. So our CRP data comes from FSA and then prepared by our collaborators at ERS. So we have is the county annual level of the CRP and enrollment over time from 1998 all the way until today. And so the important information we have is the acreage enrolled in the county in CRP and also the rental payment. And the other important information here is the cover practices. So we know like how many lands in this county enrolled in CRP and then by what practice, like how many of those are in grass, how many of those are in trees and so on, so like wetlands, so on and so forth. And the data we're using to measure our bird biodiversity comes from this eBird citizen science project maintained by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. So this provides important, like very fine level information of each birding record submitted by like everyone like you and me. So like this is a citizen science voluntary citizen science project, like starting in 2002. So any like you and me, we can go out and then just do some birding, and then we recorded how many birds we observed, how many species, where am I, like how much time I spent, how much distance I traveled during this birding trip, and then you upload every this information up to their database, and then they will try to help you sort out to some kind of data that kind of friendly to researchers trying to look at anything related to biodiversity. So I'll touch a little more on this eBird data later on. And so we also collect land cover data from Lotus and weather data from PRISM, thinking these two might be important control variables that might also contribute to the biodiversity. So a little more on the eBird data we're using. So again, this is a voluntary citizen science project started in 2002. So today we have more than 3 million checklists in our database. So when I say checklist, like this is an observation of a birding trip, and then any of us, when we upload the checklist, it will detail, like I just mentioned, where am I doing this birding trip and how much is the travel, how many birds I observed, so on and so forth. And so we'll be using this research will be using 40 grassland bird species, and then we're gonna focus our sample to the breeding season for these 40 bird species. So we end up with around 6 million observations, and then we aggregate them to so taking the county year average, aggregate them to the county year level. So one of the limitations in doing that is because for our CRP data, we don't actually know, at least the one we're using right now, we don't actually know where those CRP lands are. We know in the county how many acres in CRP, but we don't exactly know, for example, the picture I'm showing here, Tompkins County, where those CRP lands are. But we do know where people submit their observation during their birding trips. But right now, in order to match our CRP data, we just take the simple average of all of those within the same year to get our county average. So right now I'm going to give just a little some like series of graphs showing you some background on the CRP. So here we have is the CRP enrollment from 2002 all the way until 19. You can see that since 2007, the overall enrollment, so this is the enrollment at a national level, just steadily declined over time. And then a lot of those are so I'm not sure if the color is apparent, but where's my cursor? Okay, so apparently I can't really show. Oh, here it is. Yeah. So the green one here is the the grass practice. So you can see that the decline are mostly coming from the grass practice CRP enrollment. On the other hand, like the second leading one is the tree practice, but it's compared to like it's of different magnitude. So and there's not really much change of the enrollment in the tree practice going on. And so this is showing you, so what I just showed you was the like national trend, and then this is the county level enrollment between 2007 and then 2019. You can see that most of the decline in CRP enrollment are coming from the like the Great Plains, like Montana, South Dakota, all the way down to Oklahoma, Texas, and these are also the places where most of the grasslands are. So one of the kind of motivate why we want to look at how CRP benefits, if there's any grassland birds, because this is the places where we are losing all the CRP lands, and these are kind of where the places most of the grassland birds are. Okay, so this is kind of the summary statistics in a graph. So here is the correlation between the mean CRP enrollment and also the mean species abundance. So again, you can see that in the Great Plains area are the places where, so the way to look at this is like the darker, how do you call the brown color are the places where counties where you have more CRP land and also higher abundance of grassland birds. And so for like the light bluish will be the counties with higher grassland bird species abundance but low CRP. And also with like these, the red color will be high CRP but then low species abundance. So you can see that like these places are the places where we have more CRP and also higher grassland birds abundance. And so this is showing, so what we're showing was the relationship between CRP and species abundance. Here is the relationship between CRP and species richness. So pretty much similar pattern, except that the color of those, especially down the south in the, where is it? So this is Kansas and then Texas. We have fewer like overall species richness where these places are the place where you have more CRP lands. But overall pattern is similar to that of the between CRP and the species abundance. Okay, so our research design again is the instrumental variable approach. So the reason we're using IV is like because CRP is a voluntary program. So if we try to estimate it with OLS, might be the chance that there are some other variables we can account for that might affect the CRP enrollment decision. So our IV is designed as the interaction between past CRP enrollment. So that's from 10 years ago, interacted with the change of the CRP. Oh, so one important thing I forgot to mention when I showed the national trend is this decline. So this gray bar is the national enrollment cap. So at any point of time, you can really enroll more than this cap. So yeah, we've always been below this enrollment cap. And so this change of enrollment cap over time is also one of the important variation that we use to construct IV. So let me jump right back to. So our IV again is the interaction between CRP and enrollment 10 years ago, interacted with the change of the cap rate between like 10 years ago and today. So this is a little like the Bartik instrument where we have the past enrollment and they interacted with this national common trend in this CRP growth rate. And then so we argue that this IV should be correlated with our CRP enrollment today because this is from the enrollment from 10 years ago interacted with this cap growth rate. So I feel like this is a good predictor for current CRP. And also we've argued that this should satisfy the exclusion restriction assumption because the way we constructed it is using the enrollment from 10 years ago. So if they are like going to affect current biodiversity outcome, it has to be that these 10 years ago contract kind of renew and then continuing to be enrolled in the program. So I feel like this will be the channel to affect biodiversity is through that enrollment in the current period. So that should satisfy the exclusion restriction assumption. So we included some important information. Some of those are the characteristics from each birding trip, average at a county level, because like every one of us, when we go out doing birding, like we all have different level ability to observe birds, and then depends on how long time you spend, how much distance you travel, it might also affect how many birds you observe. So we accounted for those in our right-hand side to account for the variation of the effort from each birders, and we also account for like different land use types and also the temperature and also the common two-way fixed effects that account for those that we won't be able to observe common over time or changing across space. So jumping right into our empirical results, the first looking at how CRP affects birds abundance. So we do find that CRP increases grassland birds abundance. So if you look at our preferred specification here, this one is look at using all counties. On average, we find that, so the way to interpret it is because our CRP variable is constructed as a share of a county area enrolled in CRP. So this is between 0 and 1, right? So this 34, it means that if you have a county with no CRP and now enrolled then into CRP, it leads to 30, on average, 34 more bird observed per checklist. But like this is not really a good analogy to use because CRP, they actually require that you can't really enroll more than 25% of cropland in the county. So kind of the more making sense of interpreting this coefficient is that, for example, like the 5 percentage point increase of the share of a county area in CRP is associated with, on average, 2 more birds observed per birding trip. So this is, when we compare to the mean, this is like 1.3 times of the mean. So we also want to, so remember that we also have we also know different practices of CRP, right? So if we know how many acres are in grass practice, we should expect places with more CRP practice associated with higher benefits to the grassland birds. And this is exactly what we find when we look at just the grass practice CRP share in the county, not like the overall CRP of all different practices. And so the other thing we do is we want to focus on the areas where there are more grassland birds and grasslands. So this is not part of the CRP, but so this is a map from the RCPP, the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. I think this with the NRCS. So they have this map showing you different critical conservation areas, and then the one we're focused on here is the prairie grassland regions. So I feel like if we live in our sample to this region, we should expect higher benefits because this is where most of the grass are. And yes, so I expect that we do find a larger benefit associated with CRP and birds abundance when we limit our sample to the prairie grassland states. So that was for the bird abundance. So now we look at how CRP affects this bird species richness. So again, richness defined as the number of different species. So not the total number of birds, but like different how many species of birds, regardless of the number of them. So similarly, we do find that CRP increase grassland birds richness. So on average, if we increase a county, share of a county in CRP by 5 percentage points is associated with 0.5 more birds observed per checklist. So if you compare to the mean, that would essentially mean that you will double the mean when you increase CRP enrollment share by 5 percentage points. So again, we do find that when we look at grassland practice only, we're observing larger benefit compared to when we look at just overall CRP. So just quickly summarize what we have here. So we do observe that CRP increased grassland bird species abundance and richness. So right now, this is only what we have. We haven't really put a dollar value to what does it mean when we have more birds because of CRP. But what we can calculate is what's the cost associated with that, because we do know the rental payment for CRP enrollment. So on average, if we want to increase 5 percentage point is associated with a $2 million spend, but keep in mind that this is not the cost for just having more birds, right? Because CRP also targeted improving air quality, water quality, a lot of other things. So this is at least what we're providing here is, okay, by spending this amount of money, this is the number of more birds we're having, and then other studies contributing to looking at how CRP affects other aspects of the outcomes like air, water, and then we can try to aggregate overall benefit of that. And then now compared to this cost of $2 million, whether it passed the cost benefit ratio. So kind of the next step we're trying to do is to look at the co-benefits of it. So studies have shown, like my colleagues at, here at Cornell, they find that air quality improvement will also lead to improved bird biodiversity. So if improvement air quality is the channel through which CRP get benefits, that then it's important to consider this co-benefits in designing the policy. And also the next step, what we're trying to do will be trying to monetize what we find here, the increase of birds abundance and also species richness. And since we have the actual payment data, we can actually just directly estimate how like additional dollar spent in the county leads, whether it leads to more birds at all, and then compare that with the per acre increase result we find here. So kind of the roadmap to the future. And yeah, that's pretty much what I want to share today. Thank you all, and then happy to take any questions. Yes. Oh, thanks. Yes.
Two related questions. Well, first I want to say that we really cool data about quality stuff.
Oh.
And the estimate is really hard.
Sorry, I didn't hear the first part because I just realized that I just forgot to share the screen with the virtual audience. Okay, I guess it's screw up. I can definitely send my slides to anyone if you're interested and talk offline. But yeah, what was the question again?
So the question is about the estimate of not impact. I was wondering if you guys upwards or downwards and related ones to 2 dimensions of time and close comments. So let's start with time. So how long does the CRP program effectively kick in? I mean, you run information year on year. So my first question is how long does it kick in? And the second was what impact is going to be temporary or is it going to be so that's something that you mentioned. I don't know how to look at it, but I think it's cannot be touched with courage. And then on the cross-section dimension, I know very little about birds, but I thought they could easily move. So from time to time, whether that when you put in one direction, you're in a way you're tracking birds in negative time. So that potentially could bias this.
Yeah, thanks for a good question. So, so to your first question about the temporal, yeah, we definitely should look at the dynamic effects. Yeah, because usually it takes 2-3 years once you kind of progress on to really become a permanent habitat. So yeah, definitely should look at the persistent effects. We haven't really done that, but yeah, definitely something on our to-do list. And then to your second question about the spatial, this is why we want to let me go back to. We're focusing only on the breeding season because that's where they're mating and they're not really moving around. So by focusing on breeding seasons only, we can kind of avoid the case where birds are moving around and then you're kind of observing both here and there kind of on different days. But yeah, so by leaving to breeding season, kind of trying to alleviate the possibility of them moving around and then like double counting or any other kind of issue related to the spatial of that. Yeah.
So were you able to validate the work
I didn't hear the first part of it. Validate against.
Because only there will be areas that are important.
Yeah, so I didn't get too deep into it, but yeah, they do have a team trying to do this. So of course, one of the way to address this is by including these effort variables to account for the variation of like different observers' ability, right? And the other thing they do is they kind of cross compare all of the observation at kind of the same time in the same place. So for example, for myself, I don't really bird too much. So I might miss a lot of other like observed bubbling here, but then I might miss a lot of other species. So my checklist, when I upload, they will compare mine with like maybe another professional birders, submit the same, like his or her checklist around the same time in the same area. If that person observed like other species, then mine will be defined as an incomplete checklist. So in our analysis here, those checklists will be dropped. So they're kind of filtering out the lower quality in a sense. And then, yeah, so I don't think they have a kind of evaluation process, but they have this kind of filtering process. And then to limit our sample to those that I feel like confident that they are really observing all of the birds. Yes, I think, yeah, he was
Yeah,
that.
so one of my comments is related to that. So the idea that all of the eBirds data is people are choosing to go to a particular place, right? So if you know that there have been dramatic increases in, say, grassland practices or wildlife practices, you might be inclined to opt into birding in that region, right? So in such a case, you would have your observed increases in birds, which is correlated with CRP because people are birding there more frequently. So I can imagine, I doubt this is happening, but I can imagine a situation where you can find statistically significant positive increases. It's totally spurious, just because people are birding more frequently there, not because there's an actual baseline increase in actual birds. So just something to sort of think about with the sort of voluntary nature of the birds data. The other comment I had was on your exclusion restriction. So I think changes in the acreage cap make sense if it's not driven by wildlife practices. So you've got an ecological outcome. If the acreage cap changes are driven by wildlife practices, you could have reverse causality with your instrument that would sort of threaten your exclusion restriction. So another thing.
Yeah, to your second point, yeah, I'm not really sure if I have any, because the enrollment cap apply to every, like, it's not like we have a cap for a particular practice and then the other practice is just overall cap for.
Well, there are caps for individual practices that might not be the data but there are specific.
Okay. Yeah, then if that's the case, that would be really a good direction moving forward. Yes.
To follow up with the conversation about papers, so first of all, this is a great paper. Because I'm sure referees will is about data. I'm sure your colleagues know that there's other data set. Transects do the same, professionals do the same bird counts and the same places every year.
The breeding bird survey?
Yeah, the breeding bird survey.
Okay.
So we had just wrote a paper about comment on bird populations and things like that. So, because there are big limitations to that, but it's different, totally non-endogenous source of data. So
yeah, that's also right. Like, yeah, none of the two are perfect. Like for breeding bird survey is mostly coming from like along like a road. So,
yeah.
But for eBirds, you come from everywhere else. But for, yeah.
Actually, to see whether there is variation in the number of trips that people do in business and see that get that out of
I don't know who's, but yeah, go ahead.
Did you control for wind turbines in the grasslands areas? If anything, that should probably moderate the results. So in essence, I would guess. Some of the species.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, we're not accounting for that right now. And then
It's a national wind turbine database. Get access to the specific location. Now, I also have another question for you as well. I don't know, with your instrument, are you, so using the instrument, are you thinking about the national caps and the effect all of the time? Or are you thinking about the cap at the county level?
Because I'm curious on the variation there is with how much the caps at the county level are actually affecting enrollment and what that variation looks like.
The cap at the county level, you're talking about like 25%.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we haven't used that, but yeah.
I would have looked at the county level variation due to the caps, and I'm wondering if that might be biased, just something.
Thanks.
I really do.
And then, oh, sorry, yeah.
Does it matter the type of birds that you see? Because I was wondering, maybe you have an increase of not so valuable birds, or maybe you have more migratory birds, and maybe just having this land, maybe serving their one kind of bird, or whatever.
Yeah, so right now we're not really differentiating, but like our colleagues at the level of all, they do kind of label each species of like more vulnerable or like lower risk birds. So yeah, we can definitely try to differentiate that, looking at individual effect, not just like overall number of birds. Yes.
I'm gonna ask another question. You have in your model the land cover as control. But it seems like that's the primary mechanism through which the changes in CRP affect the bird population. So I'm curious if you tried, leaving that variable out to see if you might actually get bigger.
Yeah, we try both. It doesn't really affect anything. I wonder it's because we are getting this at county level, and then the way MODIS define like cropland, grasslands, probably not matching directly with how, like for example, the CRP define grass practices, so on and so forth. So maybe that's why it's not really like, yeah, in theory, if for example I control for grassland, then it's supposed to block every variation from the CRP. But yeah, it doesn't look like it affects much at this stage. At least when we're looking at county level variation. Yes.
So you showed us an example of what the eBird sampling looks like in Tompkins County, where it was located. Well, what share of counties do you get? I mean, what's the density of sampling in those prairie counties that are pretty far from towns and cities that might have a lot of bird enthusiasts?
Yeah, that's also a limitation. So yeah, like you're right. Like especially in the Midwest, that's where we have fewer observation actually compared to like the coastal like big cities. But like these Midwest or Great Plains areas are like where CRP lands are. So yeah, it is a little limitation. So that's why we're trying to use. So because right now we are just aggregating them to like county level. If we have like CRP field level information, I think that's a possibility to apply for. I'm not sure how hard it is to get field level data. Then we can kind of limit our sample to those like birding observations that actually are close to or on CRP lands, and then we don't use any of those like in the cities where there's no CRP lands at all. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. There's definitely really not equally distributed observations across space for birding from eBird's data.
I was curious if you could other public lands, so like in the prairie region, a lot of national grassland area, it would probably be comparable to CRP that way. But the benefit of having, a little bit of CRP land is already natural grassland. The benefit of smaller.
Well, so I guess by including like the land cover from MODIS should account for those, right? But yeah, again, this is a matter of whether this will block like also your CRP channel or not. But yeah, like looks like including it or not doesn't really affect much anything. So, but yeah, we should look more deep into that. So yeah, again, this is really preliminary at this stage. Oh. Yeah.
Small, pile of other assets. So instead of just controlling for
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, really nice suggestion. Let me take a quick look at whether the So Andrew Swenson asks whether for the value that I consider like consumptive uses of some resident birds such as hunting. So short answer, no, we haven't really considered any of that at this stage. Yeah, so let me jot it down. Definitely something we want to look at once you want to really add a dollar value to what we find here. And
So related to that, birds are only one out biodiversity, right? Potentially the same policies affect small animals, insects, other things. So I don't know if you, I know you're working with ornithology, so I don't know if you want to go that direction. You know, if you want to global value,
yeah, I'm just gonna record everything and then just to bring all of this question to my colleges colleagues. Hopefully they have a better answer. And yeah, because and then short answer is yeah, this is something we need to consider. But yeah, I'm not sure how in the stage to incorporate all of them. Discussion the time is be valuable to measure the impact of bird report. Yeah, thanks, Brian. That's a good suggestion. And disengage pendulum quality channel from this channel. So we should talk. Yeah, so Brian, I guess, yeah, I'll try to reach out to you offline about your questions and then yeah, the especially explicit CRP. Yeah, thanks for your question and suggestion. Right, any other questions? All right, thank you guys. And then so we have like 15 minutes still. So if any one of you have any other questions for Andrew, feel free to ask and then feel free to stay longer to chat or if not, then thank you all for being here. Look forward to the rest of the sessions. Thanks.